Okay, everyone, thank you for joining this Zoom meeting today. It's been a while since we've all been together in terms of forums. We're actually having a joint forum this time with the North East and my colleague Maureen, who will give you a wave, I think. Yeah. The reason being that a lot of our colleagues have been dipping in and out of all the different forums because we've had them all over the country as usual. And also it's a good opportunity to see other faces from other regions too, I think. So we've also got Nina and Brian who are going to sort out any kinds of admin or difficulties we have in terms of Zoom. We have a really quite interesting agenda today. I hope you've all had sight of the agenda. So what we will do is we'll start, Maureen's going to tell you about a little bit about what NEA has been doing in lockdown and how we've been coping. We've got Matt, our policy manager, who's going to tell you more about what we've been doing policy-wise. This is a pre-recorded talk, but we will be able to answer questions, and if we can't, we can always pass them on to Matt. We've then got Jamie, who's talking about connecting homes for health, which is a really relevant project at the moment, because I think we've seen how ill health has impacted people in terms of when they do get COVID-19, and ill health is a massive part of meaning that becomes a really serious condition. We'll have a bit of a comfort break if everybody wants one, but we'll see if we want one of those. And then we'll have a discussion. We'll break out into teams and have a discussion on how the pandemic has affected you and your organisation. Any good practice that you can share with the rest of the group, and how NEA can best support you throughout this time. We'd be interested in your views on that. After that, we do then have Katie Rebel, who is the Development Officer for EST for Southern England and Wales. And she will be talking to you about the Energy Redress Scheme, particularly Round 8. And finally, we'll have Tim Roebuck from AirX Technologies, and he'll talk about a very interesting piece of kit that ventilates under the floorboards in solid gold houses. You're all on mute at the moment. If you want to speak, you can look at the little icons at the bottom, and you can, where it says reactions, you can put your hand up or your thumbs up. You can unmute yourself if you wish. We will take questions. There's also the chat option, and we've got people monitoring that, and we'll try to answer those questions as we can. So without further ado, I'll pass to Maureen, who will tell you a bit about what NEA has been up to.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Maureen Fildes. I'm the Project Development Coordinator for the North East, along with my colleague Ailsa Park-Smith, who's also on this call. So anything that I'm talking about, is directly Ailsa does exactly the same role as does Diane. So even though I'll be talking in the first person, I am talking about my colleagues as well. And I'm just going to offer apologies up first, because working from home, we do have the odd distraction, and I have a very noisy dog, and I'm going to put I will be on mute for the rest of the call, but at the moment, if anybody walks past or the postman comes, he will sort of go ballistic. So apologies in advance, but you've probably all got similar problems yourselves. So what we've been doing, well, at NEA we have been working flat out since before lockdown. It has been business as usual, although it has been in a different guise. Everybody working from home, from their dining room tables, from their kitchen benches. We have been taking a lot of referrals through our Warm and Safe Homes advice line, This WASH service is a free support service providing advice and support to householders and also to frontline workers. You can make a referral online or over a free phone telephone number. The number and the email address will be available after the presentation, so colleagues across the country are able to support our most vulnerable clients, whether or not that's with financial support or it's liaison with utility companies, or trying to support with debt relief. We're more than happy to take on the referrals, regardless of where you are. We do have a triage system. We do try and allocate clients within the region of the PDC. So it's sort of like myself, just so that we're aware of what local schemes are available. But we do have quite a lot of capacity to be able to take those calls. Also, what I would like to just to let you know that our training team through lockdown have been working absolutely at breakneck speed, and they have developed some great online webinars. All of these webinars are available, so it would be things like fuel debt. There is vulnerability and the energy sector. There are sort of bite-sized training sessions, a couple of hours. We've got an excellent training team, and if you have a look on our link on the website to the training team, you will find that they have an extensive timetable of sessions that you can join in. These sessions are all fully funded, so please share the links with any of your colleagues, because while we all do, you know, we're all working from home. We now no longer have those travel restrictions. The technology of Zoom and Teams means that we can, you know, if we can play to our advantage, we can access more training than we've ever been able to do before. I was going to touch on the fact that NEA have been delivering support to vulnerable customers through a top-up service for those individuals on prepayment meters, but I know that we do have Kate from the EST who's going to be discussing it later, so I'm just going to leave that to one side. And I've just seen a question pop up there. Right, does the WASH programme include home visit and measures when operating in normal circumstances? Yes, that's the short answer. We don't have measures. We do have home visits which are available, but at the moment we're trying to work through health and safety requirements with regards to how we can actually get back into a community setting. And I think I'm conscious of the time. I am going to be around all morning, and if you have any questions about what else we can offer, be happy to chat later on. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for that, Maureen. We'll move swiftly on now to our policy update from Matt Copeland, our policy manager. So could you get that going, please, Brian?
Hi everyone, and welcome to the NEA Summer Forum 2020 Policy Update. Today I'm going to take you through some policy developments that have happened recently. Before I get to that, you might be wondering how our work is being shaped by the pandemic, as COVID-19 has had such a profound impact on all of our lives, but also the policy landscape. We've outlined the impact in our recent webinar, which you can watch there, which also has input from Citizens Advice and Bays and Energy UK. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth a watch, so I'd encourage you to click through. Okay, on to the policy update and some recent highlights. So we're going to talk today about our campaign for a green economic recovery, our work surrounding the impacts of COVID-19, our campaign for the 100 discount to be extended, some news on the prepayment cap and updates on opportunity work on South Disconnection, and then a little bit on water poverty at the end. So firstly, the most exciting bit, our campaign for a green economic recovery. We joined with many other organisations in calling for the economic recovery package to be a green one, centred around support for energy efficiency. And our role there was really not just from energy efficiency, but to ensure that there was a focus on low-income, fuel-poor households in any economic recovery. Dozens of organisations have released reports, written to government, briefed the press, all sorts of public affairs-y type things to encourage such a scheme that creates thousands of jobs, reduces fuel poverty, tackles health inequalities, tackles regional inequalities, everything that government is looking for. We helped contribute to several of those. Many of you may have been involved in letters or reports and mounted quite a lot of pressure on Downing Street over the past month or so. The result of that is success. The government has announced a Green Home Grant Scheme, and whilst we don't know too much about that at the moment, I've just bulleted there what we do know. So there'll be £2 billion overall for that scheme, and that scheme comes in the form of voucher grants. So for low-income households, there will be vouchers up to £10,000 at no cost to the householder. For other households, it'll be £5,000, with the government contributing £2 for every £1 the householder puts in. We expect half of the money to go towards the low-income side of things. That was suggested by the Business Secretary. Haven't had that confirmed as of yet, but we think that is a pretty good base assumption at the moment. This is a huge success for NEA. We're incredibly proud of it. We're especially proud of the fact that the grants will come at no cost to the householder if they are classed as low income. That is something that we've heavily campaigned for, and we believe we moved the dial quite significantly on that particular point. I'd love to talk about this all day and sort of celebrate with you, but there's lots to get through and not enough time, so I'm going to have to move on. But yeah, this is certainly the biggest success we've had since I joined NEA. Something else that we've been doing over the past few months, and you may have seen our work on this, is looking at the impact of COVID-19 and how households have been affected by it. We've released two papers looking at impacts, one on addressing the impacts of the social distancing on energy consumers, where we looked at things like what support was available, what support being accessed and able to, was it accessible, and then proposed some remedies for it. We then released a paper looking at debt during COVID-19 called The Gathering Storm, and that looked at the scale of the mounting debt in the energy sector, but also the water sector as well, and included some proposals to firstly help households to ensure that they can pay the debt with sort of debt matching or payment matching schemes, but secondly make paying easier in terms of ensuring that suppliers weren't unfairly chasing debt. Additionally, we're running this year's fuel poverty monitor on the impacts of COVID-19 on fuel poor households. That's been collecting information from our staff, from many of you, through our call for evidence, and also through other stakeholders such as Westminster and the devolved governments, through interviews, and that will report back later this year in approximately September with some initial findings. Of course, it can be only be very initial because it's very early, relatively speaking, and we'll continue to try and capture evidence on this, but we think it will be really apt to understand some deficiencies, some things that went well in the first lockdown, so ahead of a potential second lockdown, we know what could be done better. Onto Warm Home Discount. So throughout the last 6 months, you'd have heard me rabbiting along about this many times, I guess, but we've been campaigning for the Warm Home Discount to be extended and expanded. So we've partnered up with this fabulous organisation called Fair by Design, and we released a report with them outlining the need for extending and expanding the 1 discount. And many of you would have been involved in this campaign. We wrote to the Minister along with 60 other signatories, asking for clarity on the immediate future of the scheme, but also some clarity on their plans with looking into the future. We think that a 1-year extension at this point would be apt, keeping the scheme as it is, but also that the government need to consider the longer term design of the scheme to make sure that more people can receive payments automatically, as opposed to the application procedure that happens at the moment, where it's a bit of a lottery. We've also engaged more broadly with Parliament, encouraging Conservative MPs to put pressure on BEIS to provide urgent clarity, and we've also asked and succeeded in getting the relevant minister in Wales, the Welsh Government, to write to Westminster as well. So quite a lot of stuff going on here, and we're relatively confident we'll get this. It's just about maintaining that pressure. Next, Ofgem's work, and there's been 2 main bits of work as far as we're concerned over the past few months. Firstly, the continuation of the prepayment price cap. It's almost certain that this will now continue after the end of this year, when the current cap is due to end. So, as you may remember, the current prepayment price cap is distinct from the broader cap. It's one that the CMA brought in when they did their energy market investigation because of detriment specifically to prepayment customers. So we've argued that that cap is very different to the default tariff price cap, and should be sort of kept separate, but Ofgem have decided that it will roll it into it, mainly to ensure that the costs of continuing price caps aren't exceeding the benefits. Broadly, this is good. We would have preferred them to be separate, but this still provides protection for prepayment customers, and it means that 4 million households who do have a prepayment meter and are on standard variable tariffs will continue to receive price protection for the foreseeable future, and won't see big increases in their prices coming out of winter. Additionally to that, Ofgem have released their final consultations on proposals to help households that self-disconnect. Suppliers, if they follow through with the proposals in that consultation, which we expect them to, suppliers will have to monitor self-disconnection, so they'll have to understand which of their customers are self-disconnecting. All suppliers will have to offer emergency and friendly credit. Most do at the moment, all do, and all have to use ability to pay principles. All of this will all be in licence conditions, so will therefore be enforceable. And we think that whilst this is stretching for suppliers, this isn't an easy task for them to do. Specifically, the monitoring side of things will be difficult for them to do. This is really welcome, and not only is it good for those customers who are on legacy prepay, because it offers them greater level of protection, but also because this is difficult and expensive for suppliers to do, they will be encouraged financially to ensure that prepayment customers are prioritised in terms of getting smart meters, which is a good thing. The benefits of having a smart meter are much higher for prepayment customers than others. So overall, these are fantastic proposals and we can get right behind them. Lastly, a bit of stuff on our water poverty work. My colleague Jess has published a new report on the consistency of social tariffs in the water sector, and there's 3 recommendations in that report. One, that government should conduct a thorough review of social tariff guidance in consultation with water companies and stakeholders to make this report fairer for all. Secondly, there should be particular consideration given to alternative options for funding social tariff schemes. At the moment, it's a sort of cross subsidy where some of their customers pay for others to receive a lower tariff. We think there should be different ways of doing that, or considered at least. And then thirdly, government should prescribe some core eligibility criteria. So there's more consistency across different water companies of who receives this level of support, because at the moment it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Yeah, so that's that water report. And lastly, this is what's coming up in the next few months. So firstly, we have expected response from the government to the fuel poverty strategy, and we're pushing for that to be coming sooner rather than later. Secondly, as we talked about before, we're pushing for the consultation on warm home discounts, and that should be quite linked to the timing of the fuel poverty strategy, because the two are so inherently linked. And then hopefully before the end of the year, we think it's autumn, but that's always a bit optimistic. The government's published a broader, longer-term heat and building strategy, which we hope will look at not only how to increase energy efficiency of fuel poor and other homes, but also how those homes are heated, decarbonising the heating systems. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.
Okay, I'm sure you can see that there's lots going on. NEA are very keen to influence any policy connected with fuel poverty arena. Has anybody got any questions that they would like to ask? Any hands up? I can't see everybody, so no. Not
I think it might just be worth just jutting in at this point, Diane, just to remind everybody that those of you from the northeast who have clients who are in the Northumbria water area, I cannot stress enough how good a service Northumbria Water have for their people who they consider in water poverty. They have reduced tariffs, they have great schemes to help people reduce and remove their water debt. This can be actioned either by the individuals themselves or through our wash line. Our advisors can actually help to liaise with Northumbrian Water. We can make sure that the correct proof of income, benefits, and reasoning behind anybody's water debt is put across in a sympathetic way, and we have had a great deal of success. So just bear that in mind.
Good point.
Yeah. And I think there's just a question coming there, Diane, about when do we think we will see the criteria for the Green Homes grant is due to start in September? Well, I think I was under the impression that we wouldn't have the criteria until September. I think it's going to be very late in the day, isn't it, Diane?
Sorry, my connection was gone there. What was that? Is that
it was regard to the Green Homes vouchers and the criteria, and when it was due to be when the criteria was due to be set and the scheme to start.
Scheme is due to start in around September, October, and I think we're expecting an announcement this week of some description. So it's really keep your ears open, because it will be soon, because obviously we'll need to get cracking on the project itself if it's going to start September, October. And I think the hope is that it will be finished by the end of the financial year. So it's quite a task.
I think there's a lot of information to be passed to organisations as to how the scheme is going to work, who is going to benefit from it, how we can make sure that the right information is given to the right individuals. And you know, we all have this fear of sort of unscrupulous installers door knocking and trying to take advantage of the voucher scheme. So you know, education is probably you know, it's the best way to encourage the success of this scheme. As soon as NEA have any up-to-date information, you know, it will be shared. And you know, through myself, Ailsa, Diane, please feel free to get in touch at any time if you have any queries, if you hear any scare stories, or you just want a little bit of you just want to run something by us. We'll be, you know, we do have access to a lot of individuals who have the up-to-date information. Okay.
Sorry, my connection keeps dropping, so I might seem a bit unaware of what's going on. That's what you get for living in the countryside. Okay, so I just did want to say that NEA do have a real influence with the Department of Business, Energy and Industry, and also Ofgem and UK Energy. We speak to them very regularly, and I would suggest that if you have a look at the YouTube video of the discussions that were held in June with those organisations, which were at the beginning of Matt's presentation there. The link was there. It's really quite a useful insight into what an influence we do have. And yeah, I think that would be very helpful. I think as time is moving on, we will move on now, just about the right time actually. And again, I'm afraid it's a pre-recorded talk from Jamie, our research officer. She's actually on maternity leave at the moment. But it's a really interesting report on the work that we've been doing in Connecting Homes for Health. This is a pilot project which combined funding from the Fuel Poor Network Extension Scheme and the Warm Home Discount Industry Scheme. So I'll let Jamie explain that. If you could set that up, please, Diane.
Hey everyone, I'm Jamie Lee Rosenborough, Senior Research and Policy Officer at NEA, and I'm here today to highlight some of the impacts achieved and lessons learned as a result of our Connecting Homes for Health pilot research project. Before I go any further, I'd like to share Steve's story with you. Steve is a disabled war veteran. He suffers from PTSD. He lives along with his dog, Baxter, whom he considers to be his closest friend in the world. Steve had to leave his job due to ill health. His income was drastically reduced and he had fallen into arrears with his mortgage payments. He was in dispute with the Ministry of Defence over the calculation of his war pension and he was living on universal credit. He had one inefficient storage heater in the living room and 2 portable electric heaters. He could not afford to pay his energy bills. He generally found himself sitting in the dark and cold at home. He would wear a pair of leather gloves to try and keep his hands warm, but that wasn't enough to prevent the pain creeping into his joints and causing him great discomfort. But he preferred to suffer the pain in his hands than to risk falling further into fuel debt. At one point, his universal credit payments were temporarily stopped. For days, he did not eat, but drank only water. Steve felt incredibly ashamed of the circumstances in which he found himself, and had progressively cut off contact with friends and family as a result. He did not want them to see him struggling and was too proud to stomach the thought of their pity or their offers of help. Feeling cold, hungry and isolated made it harder for him to cope with the symptoms of his PTSD. The only person he ever really saw was his dad, who was suffering from a terminal illness and lived nearby. 1 year after participating in the Connecting Homes for Health scheme, Steve is transformed. He has an efficient and fully working heating and hot water system and knows that he can stay warm when he needs it. Despite using his heating system more, his energy costs have reduced so much that he is now able to save money each month. He even has £500 in his savings account. He can afford to buy the food he wants and not just the bare minimum. He has even had help in securing a manageable repayment plan with his energy supplier and is gradually clearing the fuel debt that he had accrued before signing up to the scheme. His leather gloves are no longer needed when he's at home. His hands do not hurt anymore, and he can take regular hot baths to further help manage his joint pain. He feels financially independent and happy. Because he no longer feels hungry and cold, he feels as though he is in a better place mentally to be able to deal with the symptoms of his PTSD. His voice now sounds bright and upbeat, whereas before he sounded sad and forlorn and was prone to tears. He says that letting the NEA advisor into his home that day was the best thing that he has ever done. The scheme, he says, has transformed his life. It has given him health and financial independence and given him hope once again. The Connecting Homes for Health pilot research project aimed to test and measure the impact of applying health-based eligibility criteria to the provision of free gas grid connections funded through the Fuel Poor Network Extension Scheme and free first-time gas central heating measures alongside tailored energy efficiency advice and support funded through Warm Home Discount industry initiatives on the health and wellbeing of vulnerable residents who are in or at risk of fuel poverty and at risk from cold-related ill health. The research element of the project was funded by Northern Gas Networks. The concept of proportionate universalism put forward by Michael Marmot argues that actions to tackle health inequalities need to be proportionate to the level of disadvantage experienced by different groups in society, i.e., the most vulnerable will need additional support. A mapping exercise was therefore designed and carried out for County Durham and Sunderland. This involved identifying GP practices within the 2 local authority areas that were showing a high prevalence of multiple cold-related ill health indicators according to the Quality Outcomes Framework, using a weighted ranking system. These were then overlapped with the Index of Multiple Deprivation rank, along with additional deprivation indicators and fuel poverty prevalence at ward level in order to give each GP practice catchment area an overall health, deprivation, fuel poverty risk score. Postcodes falling within a 2-mile radius of each of the highest scoring practices were identified and given to NGN, who carried out an additional layer of mapping to identify which properties were off gas. A comprehensive desk-based evidence review was carried out to understand the relationship between cold homes and ill health and to inform development of the eligibility criteria for the scheme. The full review can be accessed on our website. The pilot needed to balance narrow eligibility requirements to capture the most vulnerable, whilst allowing for some flexibility to capture other households in need. So I'd now like to touch on some of the impacts that were achieved for households, starting with the impact on their home heating and control experiences. Before receiving support, 76% of participants were not satisfied with the temperature in their home. 1 year after, 100% were satisfied or very satisfied. Before, 59% were not satisfied with how easy their heating system was to use. Within a year, 100% were satisfied or very satisfied. 74% were not satisfied with the amount of control they had over their heating before receiving support, but again, 100% were either satisfied or very satisfied afterwards. While 64% were not satisfied with how well their house kept the heat in pre-intervention, post-intervention, 86% were satisfied. The experience of subjective fuel poverty was also significantly reduced amongst participants. Before receiving support, 93% of households were in subjective fuel poverty. Within a year, this had reduced to 5%, meaning that 95% of participating households were not in subjective fuel poverty after receiving support. 1 year on, 100% of participants said they were satisfied with the new gas central heating system. It was also now easier for 90% and cheaper for 68% to heat enough hot water for their needs, and 35% use more hot water than they did before. 91% of those who had solid fuel systems before said that heating water in the summer no longer made their homes too hot. The experience of Carolyn and Lynette highlights the importance of having access to affordable and reliable hot water. Carolyn lives with her teenage daughter, Lynette. Carolyn is partially sighted and suffers from multiple health conditions. She's also the primary carer for Lynette, who has chronic bronchitis and asthma and who suffers from chronic skin and joint conditions. The pair live in a private rented, semi-detached home. Before, the heating system did not work and would constantly trip out the electricity. It was extremely inefficient and costly to run. Nevertheless, she had to have it turned on all the time to make sure the house could be warm enough for Lynette. As a result, she was falling deeper and deeper into fuel debt. The immersion heater did not work well, and Carolyn struggled to fill a bath with hot water at any one time. When she did want hot water, she had to wait for up to 2 hours. This made it practically impossible for Lynette to use hot water to manage her joint and skin conditions in the way that she needed. When they wanted to bathe, they had to go to her grandmother or her aunt's home instead. When things got really bad, Carolyn would borrow money from her sister to cover the cost of her energy bill. The home that Carolyn had envisioned became in her mind an unsanitary place which represented danger, discomfort and a risk to her own health and that of her daughter. 1 year on, and Carolyn and Lynette now have access to a working central heating system which provides them with as much heating and hot water as they need without having to worry about the costs. Their energy is cheaper and they have succeeded in having some of their outstanding fuel debt written off. Lynette is able to have as many hot baths as her condition requires, and her respiratory symptoms are less severe when she's warm at home. Carolyn is now pleased that she doesn't have to worry about keeping the whole house warm all day. She feels relieved that Lynette now has access to a comfortable environment in which she can be homeschooled without risking a worsening of her respiratory illness. They've been able to decorate and take pride in the beautiful home which they've been able to create. Carolyn has told her landlord that, should they decide to sell the property, she'd be keen to have first refusal. This is the place where she wants to live and where she wants to stay. It is her home. Indeed, the project either made energy bills more affordable or did not increase bills for a large proportion of participant households. Before, for example, 70% had found it hard to afford their energy bills. After, 79% found it easy. Before, 35% felt that their energy bills were manageable, but this increased to 77% afterwards. Similarly, whereas before only 34% felt their household budget was manageable, afterwards 67% felt so. The intervention also had an impact on the self-reported physical and mental health and well-being of participant households. For example, before intervention, 14% rated their physical health as either good or very good. Afterwards, 74% did so. Before, 37% rated mental health as good or very good. Afterwards, 79% did so. Before, 83% said their physical health was affected by being cold at home. Afterwards, only 7% felt that this was the case. Similarly, before, 48% had said that their mental health was affected by being cold at home. Afterwards, only 5% felt so. And finally, whereas before intervention, 73% said that their ability to cope with an existing illness was affected by being cold at home, only 5% said that this was the case afterwards. Let's take a look at May's story. May is retired and suffers from COPD. At the point at which she signed up for the scheme, her lung capacity was at 39% and she would be constantly wheezing and struggling for breath. May previously had a solid fuel heating system in her home, which she hated. It was difficult to manage and she struggled to fetch the fuel she needed from the outside store due to her breathing. She was convinced that the ash and the dust created by the system was contributing to her respiratory illness and helping to make her symptoms worse. Not only that, but it made her reluctant to have her young grandchildren over to visit. She worried that two toddlers running around the living room were in danger of suffering serious burns and injuries should they fall over near or get too close to the fire that was in the middle of the room. 1 year after, and her gas central heating system has been installed, and May was saving between £80 and £90 a month on her fuel bills. Not only did this mean that she could now afford to buy more food and other essentials, but also that she could allow herself a little treat every now and then. She was finally able to put money into her savings account each month, which made her feel content and secure. Her lung capacity had increased over the period of a year from 39% to 50%. When her doctor expressed surprise and pleasure at the improvement and asked her if anything had changed, she said that she told him that it had been down to her new gas central heating system. She said that she was warmer and that the system was much cleaner, and she no longer felt that she was breathing in harmful substances while she was at home. She did not have to struggle to bring fuel in anymore and could instead just enjoy the warmth and the financial savings. Her children had noticed that her chest no longer made a constant rattling noise and that her pallor had improved. She no longer looked grey. Furthermore, she'd been able to spend more time with her young grandchildren, as she was now confident that they would not hurt themselves when playing in her living room. Instead of worrying about the dangers that her home might represent, she could simply enjoy being with her family. May felt as though the scheme had changed her life for the better and likened it to having won the lottery. Taken together, these results show that the application of the health-based and financial eligibility criteria and targeting mechanisms to the project was successfully able to reduce the experience of health and other social inequalities in extremely vulnerable households. However, the delivery pathways developed and enacted during the delivery phase of the project were also key in enabling such results to be achieved. Ultimately, preliminary mapping is important to identify target communities or areas but that should be the start and not the end point of a successful recruitment strategy, especially when it comes to engaging and retaining the participation of extremely vulnerable clients. The reality is much more complex and much more expensive to deliver. In the case of this project, it meant repeated letters, phone calls, text messages, face-to-face home visits, door knocking, private and social landlord liaison. It also meant managing communications with local councils and parish councils and taking on board the processing of FPNES paperwork. Not only that, it meant organising and carrying out house clearances and storage space, coordinating the provision of small measures such as carpets and curtains, identifying and booking adequate interpretation services, and making onward referrals to other agencies able to provide additional support for multiple vulnerabilities. Ultimately, it's about fully understanding individual household situations and needs. At times, the application of a small crisis fund meant that the project was able to retain the participation of households who would have otherwise fallen by the wayside. Importantly, the retention of such households was achieved by spending relatively small amounts of money. The key factor was in staff taking the time to understand the barriers facing each individual household and creatively seeking out ways that would remove that barrier. The extra time and effort spent in recruiting and retaining the participation of vulnerable, hard-to-reach households was also necessary when securing gas connections for hard-to-connect properties, especially where legal complications can arise when having to seek permission to work on private land, for example. Challenges were encountered with regards to identifying whether a household had a meter point reference number, or MPRN, as well as in securing a timely gas meter installation. In this instance, for example, a company called Citrus Energy was identified who, as part of their energy advice and switching service, are able to secure first-time gas meter installations by comparing deals and installation timeframes between different suppliers. They secured a turnaround time of 10 days instead of 3 months to get gas meters fitted. The team were furthermore enabled to identify official minimum energy efficiency installation quality standards and so produced an installation checklist that installers had to use to ensure works were carried out to the highest of standards, with appropriate quality assurance checks and visits then being carried out. It was also important to work with installers who understood or were able to be flexible in relation to the vulnerabilities of households. Our report sets out a number of both practical and policy-based recommendations to facilitate and enable the replication of the delivery pathways identified during the Connecting Homes for Health pilot scheme. Details of all the recommendations that we are making can be found in both the full report and executive summary. So that brings me to the end of a somewhat whirlwind tour of the project. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit the project page on NEA's website. You can also email NEA's research or policy manager using the addresses shown on screen. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to Jamie for that. Does anybody have any questions on that particular report or that particular scheme? We do have Helen Stockton here, who is NEA's research manager, to answer any questions that you might have. No? Okay.
Can I just advise everybody, it's really worthwhile looking at the that report, and even just reading the executive summary just does give you a good overview of that project. I worked on that project with Ailsa, and it was probably one of the projects that give me most pride in the work that I do. It was intense, it was difficult, and there were a lot of barriers, you know, that we had to work around, and we had to do it in such a creative way. But the end results were amazing. I know that Jamie gave a lot of percentages there. But it is worthwhile just going through and having a look at the details, because it did have a very, very strong impact on the lives of the individuals who we saw. And these individuals were people who would have been left because there were far too many difficulties to be overcome through any of your normal run-of-the-mill standard projects. So please have a look and just absorb some of the work that we did do.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we all know that warm homes save lives, and it's a really relevant piece of work at the moment with the COVID-19 situation. And so we will be doing our utmost to influence public health and all of the health authorities in relation to, you know, improving people's homes. So, yeah.
Hi, it's Serena from Rydell. I put my hand up, I don't think you saw it.
I'm sorry.
That was a really good presentation, so thank you for that. The question I've kind of got is, obviously with Rydell, there's a lot of off-gas areas. So how would this project potentially work there? And also, bearing in mind with government wanting to be like no carbon or low carbon, is this project actually sustainable to connect to gas?
Maureen, what were the areas that in?
There it was Sunderland and Durham, areas of Durham, Peterlee.
Right. Were they urban or rural?
The ones in Sunderland were urban. It was a particularly, it was quite a newish estate, maybe it's about 30 years old, that had been built with electric storage heaters. There had been gas to the perimeter of the estate, so actually the gas installed were quite easy to put in place, because there wasn't that, maybe it's the distance that Serena might experience in the areas that she.
So probably in reality, no, it will never, people will never be in your areas connected to gas. But we're waiting for a new strategy, aren't we? The heating building strategy. And hopefully within that, we might see some ideas on how to help those in rural areas, like myself and yourself.
Diane, just to add to that.
I have gas, so I'm okay. I think it's more of a situation. I quite like the aspect of working with the surgeries.
Right.
Because obviously, I think if something could be developed working with them in any area, that would be, for me, a better result. Because obviously, I appreciate that we're not going to get gas in Rydell at all. We are going to go very much on the green economy and renewables. But it's something I think that would be really good if it can be developed. So thank you.
Doctor surgeries, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening into a previous forum in the Northwest actually, and people there had quite a bit more success in dealing with doctors' surgeries as a result of the pandemic. So now might be an opportunity. I did also see something in connection with Doctors' Union. They were also very keen on ensuring that inequalities in health were, were looked at. So there may be opportunities come from this disaster that we're living in at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. If you, Serena, if you want to take a look at the full report, then in there it'll set out the profiling and the mapping work that we did to identify the areas where we undertook the pilot. So that was the health mapping, the fuel poverty mapping, and the deprivation mapping. And we have a look at that. And if you've got any questions, do come back to me, because we can provide a little bit more guidance on that. Obviously, it'll be, you'd have to do that area, but it might be helpful in terms of helping you to understand how you might be able to identify particular GP catchment areas that are in some of the most multiple deprived areas of Rydell.
We don't have any. We have one ward. One ward. We have one ward. We don't have areas, unfortunately.
Okay, so it might be then that you could identify the low super output areas within that ward then. So there would be multiple low super output areas that fall within the ward. So if you did want to target particular communities, then you could. Otherwise, we didn't do any direct engagement with GP practices as part of this project. We use the data to help us to identify the areas to target. So a slightly different situation than.
Okay, thank you very much.
I was just going to mention, Diane, in terms of the question over our targets towards meeting net zero.
Yeah.
So for decarbonising heat, obviously that is something that NEA is very, very keen on. It is something that we're looking at, make sure that the transition to net zero is socially just, that that the fuel poor and the aren't left behind. I think in the current circumstances, until we have technologies that are available, affordable, accepted into schemes that will help the most vulnerable, gas currently remains one of the cheapest options, but also is lower carbon than, say, solid fuel and oil. So at the moment, it provides a solution to some of the most vulnerable households, fuel populations. And that's not to say that NEA isn't working towards decarbonising heat. I think it's part of the transition. We can bring households with us, moving them from very high carbon to lower carbon technologies. And then when the technologies are available, affordable and accepted into schemes, then we can further transition households into lower zero carbon heating. But the low carbon transition and the net zero transition, it's really important that we look at what the social justice implications are of that, and we make sure that vulnerable households have access to low and zero carbon technologies, and that they're supported in order to be able to benefit from them as well.
Lovely, thank you.
Just looking at a question here from Linda Palmer. Were landlords asked to contribute whereby the property was privately rented, or was the installation works fully funded regardless of tenure of property?
Fully funded, I believe, wasn't it, Maureen? I'm just trying to think. There was a couple of instances of private rented, I think.
There was quite a few. There was actually quite a few private rent.
But it was all fully funded. There was no.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. An interesting point here from Andy Clixby in connection with the NICE guidance. That might be something we should be flagging up more robustly at this present time. So that's a useful idea, thank you. If you have questions in there that I haven't answered, please forgive me. Not brilliant at multitasking. Yeah, from Simon Kilshaw. Yeah, I know the scheme highlights much of what we've all experienced in the past. And
that's available in this report, so as well as the dramatic impacts that it's had on people's lives, as Maureen was alluding to. I think one of the really useful aspects of the report is the pathways that it sets out. So what is it that you actually need to do in order to achieve the kinds of impacts that we've achieved in this pilot? And I think that's maybe one of the most useful kind of parts of the report in terms of sharing lessons for others that might want to take something forward.
Okay, Helen, thank you. Any more questions for Helen while we have Helen? No? Okay, thanks Helen for joining us. Okay, so we can now have a 5-minute break if you'd like that, to just stretch your legs for a few minutes. If you could be back by, let me just see, 11 o'clock, it gives you 4 minutes. That's quite a short workout you can do in 4 minutes. So we'll be back in at 11, thanks. So, shall we get cracking? Yeah. So the next part of the forum was so that you would have a chance to have a discussion in small groups. What we would like you to discuss are a few questions that we've been asked to put to you via our policy people. We know there's been lots of challenges with COVID-19 in terms of helping vulnerable customers. if you'd like to highlight some that you have found in your organisation, that would be helpful. But we're really interested in any best practice that you might have that you can share with the rest of the group. And if there's anything that NEA can do to help, we'd be happy to know what that is and see what we can do. If you don't have an NEA member of staff in your group, I wonder if somebody in the group could become the facilitator. Someone could nominate themselves to become a facilitator. We'll have a little bit of a quick feedback at the end. So there's going to be 5 groups, I believe, and Nina, I think, is going to put us all into groups.
Yep, just tell me when you're ready.
Questions will appear in the chat, do they, Nina? Yeah, the questions appear in the chat.
They are in the chat now.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to focus on best practice, that would be very helpful for us. You've got about 15 minutes and you will get a 2-minute warning when we're about to close the chat. Okay, so Nina, that would be great, thank you.
Okay.
That is all back. Right. Well, I hope you found that useful. I did, particularly. We talked a little bit about what the main challenges were and any best practice that might have come out of that. I was in group 4. The main challenges were getting in touch with energy suppliers. People did eventually find ways around this, but it was a bit of a challenge to begin with. Apparently using Twitter is a good way to get a response quite quickly, because Twitter is more accountable and more transparent. So it's a good opportunity to actually get a response from an energy supplier if you're really struggling and need a response quickly. In terms of best practice and groundwork, set up a partnership with a local welfare support scheme who were giving out fuel vouchers, but they just couldn't cope with the number of vouchers that were needed. The groundwork helped with that and could provide vouchers for people by direct payments to the supplier, BACS payments, and sometimes even physical payments going to top the card up for people. And in that way they've helped 300 vulnerable householders. So I think
that might be worthwhile looking into a bit further, Diane, about the BACS payments, the direct payments, because that's something that we've always struggled with.
Right, so I'm sure Simon will talk to me later about that. So thanks, Simon. So in terms of group 2, do we have anybody who wants to give a bit of feedback?
Yeah, I was sort of in the breakout group 2, so we looked a little bit at challenges as well, but I think touched probably more upon the best practice. We, similar to yourself, we sort of touched upon how the response from energy companies is just so varied at the moment. Some are brilliant, really quick to get back, and others you try and bring in email and the responses are just so varied. We touched upon again as well just how virtual in some circumstances is good, but just the digital inclusion factors of engaging with all the people, people not on the internet. So if you're asking for, you know, things to be emailed or WhatsApped, for some people it's just not viable. And interestingly as well, I think somebody talked about getting like the feel of a household, which you get from a visit, which you just don't get over a phone call, which can often help towards signposting people for help.
That's right, yeah.
And then just as well that sometimes phone calls and sort of back-to-back repeat phone calls can just be as time consuming as a visit. So, you know, it's, you're not having to leave the house, but actually time wise you still spend a lot of time trying to support somebody.
Right.
And then best practice was groundwork. We're talking a bit about how they've sort of slimmed down and streamlined some of their processes because of COVID. So for like things like eligibility criteria, the way of progressing things and doing things without contact, they've been able to get sort of work done quite quickly. through processes that they might still keep in place. So for people that need, you know, got no hot heat and hot water, they've been able to still get things done quite quickly. Twitter was mentioned again as a good way of getting bits of advice, general support from energy companies as well. The new partnerships that have been formed out of lockdown, linking in with COVID-19 groups, food banks, partnerships that weren't there before have suddenly come into fruition, and people that should have been talking before have suddenly sort of built up relationships to support one another. And then just groundwork again was sort of saying they're linking to some of the welfare services. They've been looking to do more of a holistic approach to householders, so it's avoiding like repeat sort of advice recipients. So they're sort of tackling an issue and managing to get a lot more done with that person rather than coming back further down the line. So that was quite an interesting point, and that's where we got to.
So remind me, you were group?
Group 2.
Okay, I'll go back to group 1 now next. Thanks for that, Ailsa. Group 1, anybody got any comments they'd like to?
I took a few notes because we didn't have an NEA person in our breakout group, but it was really useful hearing about what other sort of colleagues have been doing. In terms of what the challenges were, I think a lot of people were saying it's kind of business as usual, particularly those of us that were working on the front line, so working with the vulnerable people, the rough sleepers, the switching schemes, and the energy advice kind of continued. There was some emergency need for particularly around discharge service requests, first time central heating, but there was a challenge to kind of work out what was actually an emergency. One of the people on the call was working with the kind of eco and trying to support the businesses and the supply chain to make sure that, you know, they're fit and able to support going forward. And in terms of, you know, what we were doing as well, there was a lot of redeployment within the council to make sure that we could support things like food parcels, but we also linked in with the local welfare assistance grant and adult social care, so we're going back to some of those people that are vulnerable. We didn't think we had any good practice, but we did have a couple of ideas of how NEA could continue to work with us over this time. I think it's a lot of what NEA do already, so support with training, linkages, keeping up to date on latest developments, you know, particularly around the Green Homes grant and the Warm Homes discount sort of information and strategies going forward. And also potentially more information and links with the fuel voucher scheme. A lot of us have got advice services or working with people, but perhaps that might be something we could link in with going forward.
Sure, thanks. Thank you. Group number 3.
Hi, I said that I would kind of chat through some of the notes that I made for group 3. So some of the points that have already been kind of mentioned, we talked about a little bit in our group. So especially with, you know, problems with speaking to suppliers, you know, like I also said, some better than others, as always, but some particularly kind of just saying that, you know, that they won't kind of discuss matters with the advisors. So we talked about, you know, the fact that we can still use kind of forms of authority to send into suppliers, but there are potentially some additional delays in doing that at the moment, with, you know, people working from home and having to go through different channels for that administration of that sort of thing. Also, some people kind of the suggestion of using the 3-way conference calls as well, to be able to facilitate that conversation with suppliers and a client at the same time. However, again, you know, some tech issues with that, with people working from home and you know, kind of not having access to the technology that they might have in the office to be able to enable that. Talked about kind of issues around getting out to people's homes and installing, you know, kind of replacement heating systems for people with no heating and hot water, or for smart meters as well, and talked a little bit about the problems arising around that with the, you know, the COVID risk, and, you know, trying to sort of risk assess around that, and the challenges of doing that with COVID, that, you know, for some of these very vulnerable elderly people, that maybe the risk of COVID is, you know, might be more than the risk of, you know, repairing the heating system at an earlier stage. So the delays that are associated with that. Also talked a little bit about you know, the fact that I was mentioning with some suppliers that some are now starting to say that they will go out and you know, kind of look at properties where there are issues, that you know, they need to kind of send people out to have a look at meters or whatever, but that's kind of, you know, depends on the supplier very much, and there's mixed information that we're getting from suppliers around that, around you know, when the staff are going back out, or whether they're furloughed still, or whatever. Also talked about challenges with you know, fulfilling contracts for funders. Talked about some funders that, you know, haven't given any flexibility regardless of the COVID situation, so you know, still haven't hit targets regardless of, you know, what's going on, and that, you know, maybe that there's no extensions being offered on that. So the difficulties around that, and having to kind of adapt ways of working, which some have managed to do, to kind of still kind of meet those targets, but just obviously depending on the contracts that is.
Okay.
Yeah, and we just, the one point that would kind of discussed was that there was some good things coming out of that quick conversation, and I mean, obviously I'm from Northumberland, so I would usually be in the northeast, but I was in the group with a lot of people from the other region, so I don't know if there will be kind of a delegate list kind of shared at the end for contact details or anything like that. Might be good to kind of do that.
Okay, thank you very much, that's great, thank you, Laura. Okay, and finally, group 5, please.
That with me, and I keep this really brief because I think we probably everybody else has covered what we were talking about. I think probably the biggest challenge is going to be is going to be home visits. You know, whichever organisation you're from, whichever utility you're from, it's going to be how we get back into people's households. Some people are letting suppliers back in. Smaller organisations might find the difficulty with regards to health and safety risk assessments. That's going to be a challenge, and following up with the PPE. And yes, we have all. I think we all realise the importance of that of that feel of an individual when we are out in a home setting.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I hope you all found that useful. I did, in terms of ideas and inspiration. So thank you for that. Without further ado, can I now pass on to Katie Revel, please? Brian, are you still with us? I can't see you on my screen. Yes, you are.
Yeah, we're both here.
Are you ready, Katie?
Do I need to share my screen for the
presentation? You do indeed, Katie. If you would just click the green share screen button at the bottom if you have your application open that you'd like to share. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can people see that?
Yeah. Do you want to put it into presentation mode? Yeah. Great.
Okay. Is that okay? Okay. Perfect. Hi everybody. I realise that time's pushing on, so this will be a whistle-stop tour of Energy Redress Scheme. And sorry if you've already heard this or you already know us. I do recognise some faces in the windows and some of the people that we've actually funded, which is great. So I'm Katie Revel. I'm one of the development officers, been working with the Redress Scheme for nearly 2 years. I'm based down in sunny Devon, and I cover England and Wales. And my colleague Amanda Megson, who's actually on leave at the moment, covers your patch, and she's based up in Stockton-on-Tees, and she comes from Middlesbrough Environment City Trust. So she was part of the Affordable Warmth team before she came across to EFT. So the redress scheme, for those of you that don't know, it collects the voluntary payments when energy companies have been a bit naughty. And so when an energy company does do something wrong, they can either be fined and the money goes to the Treasury, or they can pay direct compensation to the people that were affected, or they can say, oh, we're really sorry, we'll make a voluntary payment to make up for it, and we collect that payment. So it means that we don't necessarily know how much money we're getting on a regular basis, on an annual basis or a monthly basis. and we check what's in the pot on a quarterly basis. And if there's a decent chunk of money in there, we will open that up as a grant scheme open to registered charities in England, Scotland and Wales to deliver projects that support energy consumers in vulnerable situations. So obviously the money comes from energy companies when they may have messed up bills or cut people off and things like that. So it's got to go back to redressing the harm caused. And that means that a lot of the projects, the majority of the projects we fund, are energy advice schemes that give in-home energy advice, telephone advice, help people sort out their fuel bills, deal with metering problems, things like that. We funded 101 projects so far, and I think we've given out about 15 million so far. So the projects we fund, it can be capital or revenue funding, and up to 100% of the project cost. Projects lasting 2 years, I would love to be able to fund people for 3 to 5 years to really give some consistency, but 2 years isn't bad in this day and age, so that's what we can do at the moment. The minimum grant amount is usually £20,000, so we do want to fund projects of a decent size, and the maximum grant is set depending on how much is in the funding stream that we've got open. It's important to note that grants are paid quarterly in arrears on receipt of progress reports and grant claims. So unfortunately, we don't pay anything up front. You do have to have the cash flow to cope with delivering activity for 3 months and then claim it back from us. A big thing with redress that is quite frustrating sometimes is obviously we can't deal with eco in any way or do anything that's going to support an energy company that may have had to pay, because they may have paid the redress payments, so obviously they can't benefit from the redress scheme. So it means we can't fund anything that's potentially covered by eco. So obviously if we're working with lots of vulnerable households, they're likely to be eco eligible, and we can't fund their measures if it could be funded by eco. We can't fund eco top-ups. We can't fund direct referrals into supplier obligations such as their priority services registers or warm home discount schemes. So our projects can raise awareness of those obligations, but aren't supposed to make direct referrals into them. So we've actually got round 8 open at the moment. Obviously, not long until the deadline. It closes next Thursday at 5 p.m. To apply to redress, you have to be registered with us to start with. So you go through, you fill in a registration form, we do a due diligence process on you and check your accounts and things like that. If you're deemed eligible to apply to the scheme, then you're kept informed of when new rounds open, and you get access to the charity dashboard through which you make the applications when rounds open. So at the moment, round 8 has a small project fund with £500,000 in it for grants between £20,000 and £49,000, and we have a big main grant fund of 6.5 million in it. So that's a decent size for us. Quite often we do also have an innovation funding stream that can support new products or services that might be useful to energy consumers. Unfortunately, we don't have an innovation funding stream open in this round because we're reviewing the sort of eligibility criteria and what we want to get out of the innovation funding stream. So the priority for both of these funds that are open at the moment is generally supporting energy consumers in vulnerable situations. Just one thing to do with capital projects, the redress scheme is not currently set up to support improvements to individual community buildings or facilities. So as you can imagine, we do get quite a lot of village halls, churches and things like that applying to us wanting new installation and boilers, and those projects just aren't going to help enough people. They're not going to qualify and do well in our processes. So you've heard a bit about Crisis Fund today. Back in April, May time, there was quite a big payment into the redress scheme, and Ofgem, to do with the pandemic, thought, right, we need to get some support out there for people on prepayment meters who may have been affected by the pandemic. And so they suggested, well, they requested us to set up a crisis fund to help get emergency fuel vouchers out to households across England, Scotland and Wales. So we're into round 3 of the crisis fund at the moment, which does actually close on Monday. The eligibility criteria to receive the vouchers are supposed to be that obviously they're on a prepayment meter, they're at risk of self-disconnection or they're disconnected, and they've been affected by COVID in some way. So that could mean they've been furloughed, loss of income, increased cost because people are at home. Those are the three main criteria. Households can get up to 3 vouchers through the fund, and the vouchers obviously tend to be worth as a maximum £49, and they can be spread between the gas and electricity vouchers. Because Ofgem wanted to get the funding out quickly, the projects that we funded have only 3 months to get all the vouchers distributed. We encourage people not to necessarily shout about it from the rooftops on social media and press releases, just because we don't want scammers to take advantage of the scheme, go, hey, free money, let's go and just apply everywhere. So it's most supposed to be generally promoted via their own people's charities' own clients and through their referral networks and people they come into contact on a regular basis. It covers the cost of the fuel vouchers, the admin charges of the voucher providers, so that's often, I don't know, about £3.60 a voucher, and also charities can get up to 15% of the value of the vouchers as a charity grant that we don't really look into. That's just in recognition that there's going to be some time and staff costs involved in setting up and administering the scheme. So just for those of you out there who might need to or want to refer people to for fuel vouchers, NEA does have a pot of fuel vouchers that they can deliver across England and Wales. And I'm just racking my brains here looking through the list of people we funded so far, and I hope most of these are in the appropriate areas. But Citizens Advice Bureau Northumbrian in Northumberland has got fuel vouchers. Citizens Advice Stockton, Doncaster Deaf Trust, Finchale Training College, northeast of England, they say they're delivering them. Groundwork Wakefield, covering Yorkshire. Middlesbrough Environment City have got some vouchers from us. New Ground Together, which is possibly a housing association, and One Manchester Limited. I can possibly share my lists of who's been funded so far via round 1 and 2 of the crisis fund, but they're not to be shared publicly. They're for your information if you need to refer clients to those appropriate charities. Okay, one more minute. Obviously, we received a huge number of applications for energy advice schemes. If you are interested, then you need to make them stand out from the crowd somehow. The energy advice must be high quality, and if people are delivering face-to-face, in-depth energy advice, we do look to see the City and Guilds in level 3 in energy awareness. We want the advice to be tailored to the target audience. So obviously, if you're talking about working with elderly and very vulnerable, it might not be best to say, hey, we're going to target them digitally in some way. You know, it's got to be tailored to that audience that you want to reach, and it's got to be meaningful. So we're not into funding just huge leaflet drops and poster campaigns or social media campaigns. We want that one-to-one support that really gets to the bottom of their home energy issues. When it comes to capital measures, we have a list in Annex 3 of our guidance document of things that we can fund, from draft proofing to loft insulation to, you know, so a lot of the smaller measures that sort of a good green doctor or someone would give out. Those can be covered by redress. And if you want to include a crisis fund within a normal funding application, then say you had an energy advice project and you wanted to include, you know, £5,000 to give out to those most in need, we would want to know the eligibility criteria for that. How would you ensure it got out, you know, safely to people, and what longer term support will be provided? We don't want any just sticking plaster. Here's your fuel voucher, off you go. We would like to know what support you provide, you know, to help sort out their issues long term. So our top tips is pretty obvious, but you can really tell when an applicant's not looked through the guidance document and is just winging it in the application form. Doesn't go down too well. So if you are interested in applying, please look through the guidance document. It does tell you really what to put in each section. It's really important that we don't duplicate existing services. So in an application form, we want to see in the additionality section that people have checked around what's the local citizens advice doing, what's groundwork doing, is Project LEAP in the area, you know, what's the council delivering, and if anything else is going on, how are you going to work with those other organisations for the benefit of vulnerable people rather than compete with them or duplicate with them. Obviously, current projects need to consider the potential implications of COVID-19 on the projects, which might mean that home visits are postponed to a later date. How are you going to work around that? And further information, yeah, we've got a webinar on our website, which has got some top tips on the redress scheme. So there's the contact details. So Amanda will be back at work on Monday if you do want to talk to her. Otherwise, obviously, I'm perfectly happy to help. We are both more than happy to be phoned to talk through project ideas or to be emailed. If you're unsuccessful in the round, we will always try and give as good a feedback as we can on how you could improve the application or where it could have been strengthened. The energy redress at est.org.uk, I respond to that as quickly as possible. That is our main one. So use that if needs be, or contact Amanda or myself directly. And I think that's it. And I'm perfectly willing for NEA to circulate this presentation so that people don't need to take notes and things.
Okay, thank you. It will be on our website. It'll be via a YouTube sort of slides. So
okay, so they don't need to necessarily get it sent attached. It's going to be available when you send your link to the thing. Okay, cool. Should I stop sharing?
Yes. Would you like to answer any questions that there may be?
Yeah, of course. I'm more than willing to answer any questions in chat or verbally. That's fine.
We can actually circulate the list of people who've already got the crisis and the top up.
Yeah.
So don't worry about that.
Okay, cool. I'll forward that to yourself.
I think we do have it somewhere, but if we're allowed to forward it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Useful people to know that round 8, after it closes, the round 8 projects will be likely to start in October, and round 9 I'm hoping will open in October. It might not have a huge pot of money available because we just don't know what's coming through from Ofgem, but we do try and have quarterly funding rounds.
Okay.
Could I ask a question, please? Lynn from Scarborough Council. It's the White Rose Home Improvement Agency. We're self-funding, obviously. We do the DFGs. So we get funding through for a lot of the work that we do, but we do apply smaller grants through projects like the Warm and Well and foundations, safe charities and things like that. Are we able to access any of this kind of funding? I know we looked at it earlier in the year, or end of last year, I think, and we were told that as a council, it wouldn't qualify, it needs to be charities. But obviously a lot of the funding that we're using are from charitable trusts. And I wondered if there's a way of tying in any of this sort of funding to projects that we do, which are always sort of geared on a one-by-one basis through our energy officers or our wellbeing visits, and then dealing with vulnerable customers for all the sort of things that we're looking at here.
Councils can certainly be involved in projects, but it's the application and the project is supposed to be led by a charitable partner. Sometimes, obviously, if you're lucky enough to have a home energy team in the council, sometimes we've had applications when part of a post of the person in the council is to be funded by redress, and that's okay so long as it's not a statutory position that's generally funded by the council, because we're not allowed to replace government funding in any way. Home improvement agencies are really well placed to support redress projects. Obviously they're used to going into people's homes and to give advice, and they can perfectly capable of installing LEDs and draft proofing and things like that. So it depends, Lynn, if there is a charity that can apply that you're part and on your behalf and you're part of the project, the council can't physically apply to the redress scheme. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's worth having a word with me in connection with NEA as a charity lead, or whatever else there is in the North Yorkshire region.
Okay.
Expect a phone call then, Diane.
On another project, and they were going to look into it and discuss it with us, but we haven't had anything back, and obviously all COVID hit, so it's not been pursued since then. So it was just to see if there's other avenues that we can explore to sort of help open up a bit more funding for those clients.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Katie. That was really interesting and very useful. Thanks for stepping in for Amanda.
That's right. I'll mute myself now.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that. Yes, And now we have Tim Roebuck. Tim has been waiting very patiently and for quite a long time. Tim, are you there? Show yourself. Where are you? There you are. Hi.
I'm here, and can you hear me? Because I have had some problems with my sound.
We can
hear you.
Okay, great. And then I'll just share my screen. I don't know, I can't remember how much time we've got left, but I'm only planning to do a very quick sort of 2-minute overview as to the company Eric, if that's okay.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay, so if you can just let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, well, thanks first of all to the NEA for letting me come along and just provide a brief overview today. So, in essence, I work for a company called Airex. We are a manufacturer and a supplier of a product which is designed to replace existing air bricks within social housing. We have 2 products. The first, which is called Airex, which you can see now, and we also have one which is called the Air Room. And essentially what it is a product that is replacing existing air bricks. The air bricks themselves will be fitted externally, and there's also a little white box called the AirX Hub. I'll just give you a very brief overview as to what the purposes of the technology is. Okay. So, just as a bit of background, the company essentially started to research ways and means of reducing utility costs for social housing back in 2017. And what we identified was the fact that properties of a certain age, probably pre-1960s built, will have existing air bricks in them. And what happens is that cold air that comes in, passes through the property, and basically represents around about a 15% heat loss. The idea is that the properties are meant to be ventilated, but essentially what happens is the cold air pushes out the hot air. So what we decided to do was to have a look at a way of essentially capturing that cold air within the house. So either a subfloor level, so properties which have suspended flooring or partial suspended flooring, or indeed low-rise or high-rise flats. But if we're able to capture that cold air that's come into the property and secure it within the house, what will happen is that cold air will warm up. So what will happen is that, and what we've proven to be the case, is that when that cold air warms up, it in effect takes less energy to heat and maintain heat within your house. But interestingly, one of the things that you do have to take into consideration is that that air ventilation does need to come into effect in order to keep the house healthy and as well as the air healthy. So what we did find through some of the research we did is that many residents that were experiencing the cold drafts that were coming through would block up these air bricks. So then by doing so, there's also problems with damp and mold that occur within the house. So our technology is essentially designed to control natural airflow. So there's no associated fans whatsoever. It's just a case of being able to recognize certain levels of humidity or certain levels of temperature and open and close based upon those parameters. In terms of the installation, it's really quite quick and easy to do, and in most cases with social landlords, we'll be working with their own maintenance contractor. So what you're looking at doing from an Airex perspective at subfloor level is identifying all of the air bricks within a property, and typically within a 3-bedroom terrace, there's likely to be around about 4 to 5. And what you're going to be doing is going through the process of removing that existing air brick. You then have to mortar in the unit itself, okay? Our units are battery operated and the batteries last for 4 years. So there's no requirement for any form of, I guess, disruptive electrical cabling going in. And also in terms of installation costs, in most cases, it will be people that are already undertaking things like loft or cavity wall installation to complete the process itself. In this diagram here, what you can see is that there is a 15-centimetre arm, and at the end of the arm, there's actually a sensor which is taking the readings for humidity and temperature both externally and internally within the house. But what you're doing as an installer is that you're locating these air bricks, you're then sliding in the unit and switching it on, and then going into the property and then plugging in the AirX Hub. And then we can provide you with a clip fascia to represent a certain colour of that property, and essentially that's it for 4 years. And at the point of when you want to then come back and replace, it's a case of just reversing the process, sliding out the battery unit. The batteries are £15, they're standard lithium batteries, and then putting it back in again. So in terms of how the overall system looks, excuse me, we have, in this instance, a number of air bricks which are communicating to each other using radio frequency. So they're looking at the environmental conditions either at the subfloor level, so looking at temperature and humidity, or in the low-rise, high-rise case with an air vent at room level, also looking at air quality. And these units are talking to each other and working out essentially when they should be opening based upon certain parameters. So the units are quite smart. They've got their own algorithms in, so they can understand what's happening within that property. In some cases, if there is an air brick located in a bedroom and it can identify higher levels of CO2, the chances are that person's asleep. So the idea is that these AirX units are opening at certain points to allow some ventilation, but predominantly are remaining closed. Now, with regards to the AirX hub, social landlords are able to monitor the information on that particular property. So if you've got a number of properties that are having AirX installed, the landlord can identify, for example, where properties are excessively cold over a period of time. And then they're able to, I guess, engage with those residents to understand essentially what's happening with regards to the heating. Now, the AirX hub can either be plugged into a resident's Wi-Fi, or a social landlord can provide a 4G SIM card. But it's really important that that data, the AirX hub is on to be able to understand essentially what is going on within the property itself. It is quite important just to put across that if the AirX hub or the Wi-Fi router was to turn off, then these air bricks would continue to work for the duration of the batteries, but the data would be lost. So the resident would still get the benefits of the, I guess, the controlled air and the utility cost savings, but the landlord would lose essentially the data. Our product is also integrated with things such as Samsung SmartThings, which in short means that if landlords are considering about putting in smart thermostats or smart heating controls, our units are able to communicate with them directly, and there's no additional installation costs for the social landlord. But hopefully that just gives you a bit of a picture in terms of what happens, and probably just worth mentioning that if the batteries are due to fail, usually with a 6-month notice period, there will be an automatic email that goes to either the maintenance contractor or the landlord to say that the units are likely to run out of power. And if in fact they do run out of power, the units will just revert to an open state. So they'll just act like a normal air brake. In terms of the benefits for the residents, we've been able to go through the process, and on my next slide just talk a little bit about the associated savings. But we can prove that the properties are certainly more warmer, which is again then therefore improving the comfort of that particular resident. And also with regards to things such as COVID and the importance of maintaining some form of ventilation in the property, as part of our sort of resident engagement, we're talking and educating the residents about the requirements to have some form of ventilation. So if there are to be drafts that are being experienced, the reasons for that is to maintain a healthier home. So that's for them personally and also for the property itself. And again, with regards to lockdown measures, one of the things that we're finding really interesting at the moment is the fact that people want minimal disruption. People don't necessarily want to have individuals coming into their property to do lots of work. So it's really important just to emphasise the fact that when AirX is installed, all of the work that takes place is 100% external. We have undertaken a large number of validation reports, and we've had to do so because our product is now at demonstration action stage for Eco 3. So we're around about 12 months away from the product being fully funded. We're currently working with a number of social landlords on pilot projects, so which are ranging from between 10 to 50, in some cases 100 properties, where we're able to engage with them and the residents and about essentially installing our product to provide additional insights. Again, with BRE, we're about 3/4 of the way down the journey that our product will be recognised within the EPC, and the improvement scores are likely to be 2 to 3 points, depending if the property is electrically heated or gas heated. But in essence, or in short, we had to first of all do our validation reports. We've worked with the University of Sheffield, and a lot of work with Salford University up in Manchester. We've done a big project with NG, and we looked at the basically, within the reports themselves, which I'm happy to share if somebody's interested later on, we've looked at the before and after of the U-value performance of properties. We've looked at the air tightness and also the overall energy consumption to prove, I guess, in some ways, the reduction in associated costs, utility costs for builds themselves. So that's it. That's me, nice and short and sweet. If anybody has any questions, then please do ask. Okay.
Okay.
Let me just try and exit my screen. There we go.
Okay. Thank you. That was really interesting and a very useful product. Does anyone have any questions? I think we did have a question from Simon, I think. Yeah. Is AREX an eligible measure for energy redress funding?
Good question, and I probably would need to speak to the people involved in that to understand a little bit more. I think we are our products recognised for things such as Warm Homes Fund cap-free innovation, but it would be something I'm happy to take offline and have a discussion with Simon about directly, and also those involved at Redress to understand a little more. I can't answer any further than that though.
Okay.
Eligible for eco funding, it wouldn't be eligible for redress funding.
Okay, so I guess at the moment the product is going through eco free assessment, but we have many I guess regional or social landlords that are purchasing it through other funding means as well. But okay, thanks.
Another question. Do you work with private landlords?
Yes, we do. In most cases, we're working with social landlords, and we're also working with the able to pay market as well. But predominantly, our focus is very much on sort of aligning our strategy or our product with fuel poverty strategies within social housing. But yes, we can support private landlords, absolutely. I didn't mention the cost because I didn't want to go, I guess, too salesy. But each air brick I can do now is £75, and the AirX hub is £50.
Okay. Useful. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you, Tim. I'd just like to thank our speakers today, Katie and Tim, Matt and Jamie, who we will thank separately. Thank you for all coming along and participating. There is no evaluation of this forum today, but I hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful. I would just stress that on behalf of Maureen and myself that, you know, we would be happy to hear from you in terms of training, in terms of working with NEA. Please do remember we have our Warm and Safe Homes telephone number. We can give advice, and we do actually refer to agencies within the regions for further help. And so that would be very helpful. Thanks to Nina and Brian for the admin. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks again.